I am from Washington State, so it feels almost like home. I grew up in Longview, Washington, so actually Portland was closer than Seattle for most of my growing up years. And then I practiced law in Seattle for about 16 years. And one of the early memories I have that really helped kind of forge, I think, this desire to continue to press forward and protect religious freedoms was my experience here in Oregon with Tim. We were facing a critical issue, same-sex marriage in Washington State. Our state had been handpicked by same-sex marriage advocates with 2 cases that were filed challenging our laws. We came down here for, I think it was a day, might have even been 2 days. We went to Tim's place, got to see the print shop and all of the things that they had already developed on the importance of marriage and why it was important to believe in marriage. And that was really the first time, Tim, that I had ever seen someone articulate something other than this is what the scripture says, but some public policy reasons for why we know the scripture is true, obviously. But we also know that the principles in Scripture serve all people, regardless of whether they're believers or unbelievers. And you really forged a way in that across the United States. So it was really a neat experience for me that helped shape the future, I think, in some ways, too. It's my privilege to be here on behalf of Alliance Defending Freedom, and if you have any questions about ADF, we have a table that I'm happy to answer questions after as well and provide resources. I'm here this morning to really focus on religious freedom. ADF is the world's largest legal organization that's committed to protecting sanctity of life, free speech, and religious freedom. And we work in 3 areas: public advocacy, litigation, and legislative support. And before I move on, I want to say we're hopeful. We are hopeful about the future and that this is a fight worth continuing. America's greatest contribution to the world has been to provide a society and a legal system that is committed to protecting religious freedom. It's been a massive contribution that we've made to the larger world. And in fact, the United States Supreme Court has said years ago that in order to protect the freedom of the mind and the spirit, in order to have intellectual individualism, and to ensure that we have cultural and spiritual diversity, we must also be willing to tolerate eccentric and sometimes even offensive ideas. In fact, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision called Barnett, which involved whether Jehovah's Witnesses could be forced to salute the flag in violation of their religious beliefs. And that decision came down at the height of World War II, when we needed, more than anything else, national security and national immunity. And yet, let me tell you what the Supreme Court said. It said that the freedom to differ is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be a mere shadow of freedom. The test of its substance is the right to differ as to things that touch on the heart of the existing order. Today, the very heart of the existing order, issues such as in our understanding of sex, marriage, and religion, lie at the center of a national debate. These are concepts that we build our families around and that we have very personal beliefs about. And while our culture and our political debate may in fact shift here and there, what should not shift is our constitutional rights. Although many of the world's constitutions, international conventions, have language that protects religious freedom, we know that there are some, and certainly many here on the left coast, and I can say that as being from Washington, that want to reduce those guarantees to mere rhetoric. We know, we have an international division, I oversee the U.S. division, we know on the international side that our brothers and sisters abroad are facing severe persecution. Physical persecution for just trying to live out their faith. But what I want to stress for you today is that American believers and religious institutions, especially those of the Abrahamic faith, those who hold orthodox beliefs on human sexuality, life, and marriage, are facing a more polite persecution. Some of the first to experience this more polite persecution are those in the everyday marketplace, like you and me. They serve all customers, all clients, regardless of where they come from, their walk of life. But They decline to express ideas or participate in ceremonies that violate their core convictions. We know that governments are increasingly using laws and policies that elevate concepts such as sexual orientation and gender identity to protected class status, and then they are punishing, sometimes severely so, differences of opinion on marriage and human sexuality. Some of these punishments range not just from significant fines, like what we saw here in Oregon, but even jail time in other states. Now, I want to start out right away with a very important concept, and that is that every American, regardless of the view that they hold on marriage or on life, should be very concerned about violations of religious freedom. Allowing the government to politely persecute anyone ultimately puts everyone at risk. A government that can compel a Catholic to violate her beliefs can also compel an agnostic. And a state that can force a cake artist to violate her beliefs will easily crush the painter, the poet, and the pastor. The primary weapon that we're seeing used against those of the Abrahamic faith is public accommodation non-discrimination laws. And as we talked about briefly, those laws elevate sexual orientation and gender identity, and then they coerce people to express messages that violate their convictions. Now, some of you are probably not surprised by this. Justice Alito warned of it in the same-sex marriage decision. He said the left would vilify those who believe marriage is between a man and a woman. Exhibit 1 on the screen. 2 days from the date of the same-sex marriage decision to the day the Supreme Court agreed to hear Masterpiece Cake Shop in Jack Phillips' case. The case involved Jack, who founded his Masterpiece Cake Shop 25 years earlier. He was a cake artist, and he was known. He developed a tremendous reputation for his custom made-to-order cakes that he sketched, sculpted, and hand-painted. Jack is also a man of deep religious faith, whose beliefs guide everything he does at work. From the day he opened his shop, he determined that he could not create messages in his cakes that would violate his core convictions. So for 25 years, he's declined all kinds of messages on his cakes. But there was one decision that landed him in 6 years of litigation. But that decision, along with every other decision he'd made about whether to design a custom cake, was based on what the message of the cake was and not who the person was. And that is a critical distinction. It is about what the message is, not who the person is. But Colorado refused to recognize that distinction, and it told Jack that he needed to design custom cakes for specific ceremonies, same-sex ceremonies, that would violate his religious convictions. And then it told him that if he declined to do that, he would have to close his wedding business. So he lost nearly 40% of his income. He lost 6 of his 10 employees. And then the real topper, similar to what has been experienced here in Oregon, was that he was ordered to re-educate his family, essentially to tell them, his family members, that he was wrong to operate his business consistent with his faith. He was also told to report to the government on a quarterly basis every decision that he made in his business to decline to design a cake for any reason and why he made that decision. And Jack's not alone. Baronelle Stutzman is a 73-year-old floral design artist. She's been in the industry for 40 years. She's helped people from all kinds of walks of life, and she had a friend and a customer she served for 9 years. 9 years, dozens and dozens of custom arrangements. She knew he was gay, and he knew she was religious. And they got along just fine, including designing arrangements for him to give to his partner. But when he came in one day after 9 years, and asked for arrangements for his wedding ceremony, she politely took his hand and said, "I'm sorry, Rob, I can't do the flowers for your wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ." They continued to talk about how he got engaged, what his wedding plans were. They hugged and Rob left. So you can imagine her shock when she received a certified letter from the Attorney General of the state of Washington telling her, "You will design these flowers, or you will lose your business." She's been in litigation as well, and her case has gone up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And of course, you're aware of Aaron and Melissa Klein. Herb Gray's here, and he's taken lead on that case for many years, involving Sweet Case, where a $135,000 fine was imposed against this couple, simply for them trying to speak and live consistent with their religious convictions. And that case continues. And there's calligrapher and painter in Phoenix, Arizona that opened Brush and Nib. It's a high-end art studio. They desire to do custom design work that's consistent with their religious convictions. But the Phoenix law doesn't just threaten them with onerous fines, in fact, $2,500 for every violation every day, but 6 months in jail if they decline to create artwork that violates their convictions per day, per violation. That case continues and was just argued before the Arizona Supreme Court on January 22nd. But Jack Barronell, Brush and Nib, and Aaron and Melissa are not alone. And what I want to emphasize today, as we're identifying the problem before we get to the good news, is that it's easy to think this is limited to the wedding industry, or that it's limited to those who are the florists or the cake bakers. And that is not the case. These people are not alone in their fight. And so I'd like you to hear from them directly instead of the lawyer that's representing them.
As a kid, the grown-ups used to ask us all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? I told them, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. In 1981, my dream came true. Being one of the first African Americans on the Shreveport Fire Department had significant challenges. After living a life experiencing a lot of discrimination, it gave me a conviction that should I ever be in a position of leadership, that I would never allow anyone to have the same experience I had as a minority. That's why I was so surprised that writing a book for a Christian men Bible study would cause my career to come to an abrupt end.
These tombstones represent the lives that are taken by abortion every single day in the United States of America. This is a personal issue for me. When I found out that our pro-life club on campus was denied, it shot me right back to when I was 16 and I found out that my mom considered aborting me. When we got the news, I was angry. They were denying us the opportunity to express our diverse viewpoint on campus.
Since the physician-assisted suicide law was passed, it certainly brought home the reality that we're in a whole new world in the field of medicine. Being forced to talk to someone about committing suicide and ending their life artificially and having me be complicit with it violates my sense of conscience because my role is to protect life. This is something that really could end my practice. If I'm forced to do this, I won't continue to practice medicine in this state. I would leave my practice. There is no compromise here.
At the end of 2016, there was a state law that was passed that would force pregnancy help centers to refer for abortions. The thought of actually having to give an abortion referral to a young woman was just unbearable. This law is such a violation of my conscience. It's really unthinkable because it really totally erases the whole reason why I'm here, the whole reason why Aid for Women is here.
Five years ago, we were approached by a customer who asked us to print a message that conflicted with my conscience. So we respectfully declined the order, and I had another print shop who would print the same job at the same price. But they ended up going to our local government, and they filed a lawsuit against us to try to get us in the future to print shirts that had a message that would conflict with my faith. I received a phone call after I made the decision to decline the message, and a gentleman called and didn't give me his name, and he just asked me, he said, "Are you sure you want to stand for this? Are you sure you're going to hold your beliefs on this issue? I want to know before we do this." And I just said, "I have no option." I said, "I can't print that message," and he hung up on me. When that happened, I knew this wasn't going to be a small issue.
Every creative professional has a list of reasons why you would choose a project and why you would decline a project.
And that's true for everyone I work with. But there's a law in Minnesota that would force us to tell stories that conflict with our core beliefs. Preserving freedom of conscience is important for every single person. We don't want anyone to feel or fear that the government will punish them for simply holding an opinion that might be unpopular.
One of the great joys I have is leading a Christ-centered university, a faith-based university. This legislation, if it would have passed in its original form, would have ended up setting ourselves up for the possibility of being sued just for practicing what we believe.
Ministry is not just about being on the pulpit, but rather serving a community. So our church recently bought a property that we are developing to help victims of domestic violence. All of a sudden this law came out. That was going to make it very difficult for us to be able to serve these women that have been abused. So we worked with ADF to defend the freedoms that the church had.
Everybody in our country should care about right of conscience in all aspects of our public life. When someone else comes and dictates that you must do something against your conscience, it brings us back to some of the worst times in history. Everybody should care about this because if you're the first or some of the first to be targeted, it is assured that other professions will eventually be targeted.
Religious freedom helps everyone. It's not just freedom for me, it's freedom for everyone.
It's bigger than just this one person. It's about the freedoms for all of us to live by our conscience.
We were meant to be free. The world is a place that flourishes, that grows under freedom.
As hopefully you can see, these threats are not limited to those in the wedding industry or just to creative professionals. In fact, right now in Anchorage, Alaska, not even homeless shelters are safe. In fact, we're defending in a lawsuit right now and have filed a counter lawsuit where a homeless shelter that serves 500 meals a day and 50 women at night as an overnight shelter finds themselves with the threat of shutting their doors. A man who was dressed in a woman's nightgown came to the door one night and insisted that he be admitted into the women's shelter to sleep in a common room with other women, most of whom had been abused and sex trafficked and also had a history of substance abuse. He had a visible gash on his face, he was bleeding, and he was visibly intoxicated, and it was a clean and sober shelter. So for those reasons, the executive director said, "I'm sorry, I can't admit you into the shelter at this time, but let me give you money for a cab to go to the hospital to be treated for your injuries." You can imagine her surprise when the Anchorage Human Rights Commission then said that that shelter was going to be under investigation and had violated the Anchorage law that said they could not discriminate on the basis of gender identity. Another example is found in New York right now. New York City has a law, and Dr. Schwartz, a psychotherapist, finds himself in the middle of a controversy he neither sought out nor wanted. He serves those in the Orthodox Jewish community, and at times some come to him who experience same-sex attraction. They are adult patients and have asked to have conversations and to achieve some personal goals. He sits with them, he talks with them, he listens to them, he provides counsel to them to help them achieve those goals. And for that, New York City says he must pay a $10,000 fine per conversation. That is a confidential, personal, adult conversation that is being banned by New York City. There are also all kinds of cases involving adoption agencies, including in New York right now, where an adoption agency has placed over 1,000 children in homes, but it prioritizes placement of children into homes with moms and dads. And New York says that this agency must shut its doors if it declines to stop prioritizing children in homes with moms and dads. Now, we've heard a little bit about the challenges to life, so I won't go into those anymore. Carol, I think, has more than ably discussed those, as did the video. But there's also all kinds of challenges on campus. We saw Blaine, and then in addition to that, when we moved to Norvelia, who's the student that you saw in the video, the African-American young woman at Queens College. Her biggest goal, what she wanted to do, was start a student-life club on her campus, and the campus people told her no. The administrative officials told her no. But she stood tall and persisted. We also see it in other areas on campuses with Ellie Whitman at the Miami University of Ohio. She wanted to do the Cemetery of the Innocents, as many student life groups do, and was told she could no longer do that on her campus unless she posted trigger warnings. Now, at ADF, yes, for those that don't know what trigger warnings are, it's really a joke that they would suggest that this would be a trigger warning. But we've had 400 victories on public university campuses alone, but we simply cannot keep up with the number of bureaucrats that want to impose their values and their ideology on students. Now,